Good evening, everyone. And tonight what we're going to talk about is Daniel 4. We're going to start with the end of Daniel chapter 3. Everyone can hear me all right? Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about the story of Nebuchadnezzar's vision and madness, or is it madness? We'll talk about that. There are some interesting points to go over in this chapter. All right, so let's start from the end of Daniel 3, because that's where our story starts. Remember, we mentioned last time that the very end of chapter 3 is actually the beginning of this story. And guys, I'm giving up. I'm just going to do the yeshivish pronunciation. Okay, my apologies. Nebuchadnezzar Malka lechol amemaya umaya v'lishanaya didairin b'chol ar'a shlamchon yisgei. Right? Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all the peoples, all the nations, all the languages who live in all the land, essentially all the world, may you have much peace. Ataya v'timhaya di'avadimi ela ila shvar kadamai lahachavaya. I want to essentially declare the miracles, the signs, and the wonders that the Most High God has shown to me, has done to me. Atohi kama ravrivin, v'tim hohi kama takifin. Right? How great are his signs and how mighty are his wondrous things. Machute machut alam v'shaltanei im dar v'dar. Right? We're used to this phrase. His kingdom is everlasting, is an everlasting kingdom, and his rule is for every generation. Onward. And now he's going to start his story. So this is set forth as kind of an epistolary story, so almost in a letter, a decree almost, that he's telling to everyone. The part of the point is, why is this miracle? Part of the thing of how this wonder is done from Nebuchadnezzar is for him to kind of proclaim it to his whole empire. Okay. Ana Nebuchadnezzar shlei havet b'beiti v'ranan behechli. Right. So I was at rest in my house. I was doing well. Right. I was doing well in my palace. Chelem chazet v'dachalinani. Right. I saw a dream and I was frightened. And I was thinking on my bed, and the visions of my head scared me. We've seen this before. He calls all the wise men of Babylon to tell him what the meaning is. So that they should let him know the interpretation of the dream. Unlike before, where they actually had to tell him the dream itself. In this case, that is not the situation. Now, I do want to say that in the Old Greek version, and there's an argument between scholars, which is what parts are original of this chapter. This chapter has major differences, or many differences, with the Old Greek. Not super, but differences with the Old Greek. I'm going to follow Michael Siegel here. He does a very nice, in his book on Daniel, he does a very good analysis of this chapter. I'm not always going to go into the details. Like, he also has this whole thing about the Old Greek expansions and what they were. We're really focusing on the Masoretic text here. So I'm going to note places where it looks like the Old Greek maybe reflecting maybe actually reflecting kind of the earlier version. So in this case, this calling of all the wise men of Babylon that's not in the Greek, that's here. So we can understand this being, in order to be parallel with our previous vision story from Nebuchadnezzar, that you want him to call all the wise people of Babylon, and only then get to Daniel. In the Old Greek, he just gets right to Daniel. There's no contest here. Okay, and then he calls all the different types of officers, and he tells V'chelma amarin anad kadamehon ufishrei lamahod inli, right? So I told them the dream and they could not tell me its meaning. Va'ad acharen al kadamai Daniel dishmei Belshazzar. Now, just a second, I'm going to say something about the name Belshazzar in just a moment, because we're going to go into detail here. And so the last one to come before him essentially is Daniel. So finally, Daniel comes before him, and his name is Belshazzar, and he says, Kishum Elahi, like the name of my God. In other words, we gave him a name, right, which would have the name of my God. Now that's interesting because the only God's name here would be Bel, right? So is this meant to be Bel as in like Baal? We have that isn't a name of a God. Is it meant to be another name for Marduk, because he could also be called Baal? Something about Belshazzar is, I'll just tell you in, so let me just, I'm reading now, I'm looking now at Hartman and Delela. They have from the Anchor commentary. Balatsu Utzer, right, would be guard his life, but normally it would be with a God's name. So we'd have Marduk Balatsu Utzer or Bel Balatsu Utzer. In other words, Marduk should guard his life, or Bel should guard his life, right? Bel is in Baal, right? So this seems to be a kind of a collapse of maybe Bel Balatsu Utzer, right? Because he's saying this has the name of my God in it. So it seems like what the meaning is supposed to be is Bel should guard my life, since we're going into the name here. Oh, I see that there's a couple of chats. Okay. Yeah, Elle says, interestingly, this seems to be a mixture of Ivrit and Aramaic, or am I reading it wrong? I'm reading it wrong. It's Aramaic. Moshe Matitya, this is Aramaic. We're in Aramaic, in Aramaic country here. Moshe Matitya, why was a chapter break inserted after the first 3 verses of Nebuchadnezzar's statement? It seems like a strange place for it. It does seem like a very weird kind of thing. I don't, if I look if we look even in the, let's take a look at the Greek. I'll share my screen in just a moment. Unless I'm sharing it already, I'm not, right? Here we are. Okay. Okay, so here we have the Theodotion and the Old Greek, right? And what you have here is, in the right place, here we are. Okay. What you can see, and it's a little bit, it's easier actually just because we're looking at it in the, it's hard. What you see here is in the Old Greek, it actually doesn't start in chapter 3. You have, this is moved, right? And it's not there at all in the introduction. So instead, you have in the 18th year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar said, I was living at peace in my home. All right. So if you have this, there's an argument. Is that the original, or what happened here? And so Michael Siegel doesn't think it's the original. He says it doesn't, because you want that kind of letter introduction. And in fact, the letter introduction, the language of it is in fact parallel to what we would see in Assyrian type letters or Persian official letters. That is kind of how they would start. And it's an explanation of why you have the first person here, which normally you would not have without some kind of explanation of, oh, this is a letter, right? The year itself that's added here in the Old Greek, and again, I'm here in general when I'm talking about the versions, I'm going to be relying on Michael Siegel, but because he makes a very good argument for it. That in this 18th, saying that this is happening in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, makes the actual occurrence of his exile, which is the fulfillment of the dream, in the 19th year of his reign, and that's when he destroys the temple. So you can understand that later on, when he destroys the temple and he's really feeling his oats, that's when he gets the punishment, right? That makes sense chronologically. There's a reason to try to put this chronology in there from the point of view of whoever's editing it editing the forlag of the base text of the Old Greek, right? So if you could say if the chapter division is according to the Old Greek, then you can understand the chapter division being here. In other words, someone's using the chapter division of the Old Greek, but they don't have the Old Greek. They have, let's say, the Theodotion in front of them, but this is still more or less where chapter 4 is supposed to start, and they keep that. Maybe that's the reason. Also, you can read this, and I'm just using the Theodotion version kind of as an aid here, since that's where we're at. Because it's the same in the Masoretic text, that the fact that the king raises up Daniel's friends, and then he ends with the recognition of God, that kind of says, okay, this miracle with the 3 friends is what causes Nebuchadnezzar to praise God, right? And then you have a break, and then the next thing is a whole new story, right? Okay. Back to the Hebrew. Is that, let me actually check and see first. Do people have questions? Hold on just a moment. Let me go here. And why do I not?
No. I had one other question.
Yes.
Well, I put it in the thing, but it's about why the difference between Nebuchadnezzar's account in this chapter and the previous account. Here he says that he told them the dream, but in the narrative account it says that he wouldn't tell them the dream and they had to tell him the dream.
No, that was a different story though. You mean why in this case does he tell them the dream? In the other case, he didn't tell them the dream? The other case, we have to remember, it's the opposite. It was in Daniel 2 that he had, we had the impossible dream, right? Where he's telling them, hey, I dreamed a dream, you get to tell me, and they're like, oh, we're all gonna die, right? And Daniel kind of hops on over and he's like, hey, you're asking for something impossible, but luckily I have a God who tells me this stuff, right? So like it makes it very, very clear that it's got to be divine. The only way you could possibly understand this is not through wisdom, it's got to be through divine help, right? Whereas here, the point of the story is not a contrast between Daniel and the other and the wise men at all. There's no contest here, really, because that's not part of the story. Now, in fact, if we go back for a moment to the Old Greek, it's actually, it kind of ruins the whole thing, because he doesn't, well, he says the dream right away. You don't have the same kind of tension that you do in the Masoretic text, but there's no calling the Babylonians, right? He calls Daniel right away, right? Why bother with all these other guys, right? He just calls Daniel. So it's the whole order is different, right? But it does seem, if we go back to our text here, to the Masoretic text, it does seem that what we're seeing when we have that nice kind of like, he's like, oh no, I was so scared. We're like, oh, what is it? What is it? We have to wait a little while, right? For to find out, right? And, but it does seem that very possibly that this addition of him calling the Babylonian wise men is more to tie it in with our previous story of Nebuchadnezzar telling a dream, right? It doesn't seem to be a point to the story at all. Like it's not a point. No one's worried about dying here.
Yeah, he seems to have softened up. He's not.
Yeah. He's much softer in this story, just in general. Because he's like, just tell me, and then Daniel, but we'll let's dive into the story. In fact, as we'll see, a lot of people connect this actually to Nabonidus as opposed to Nebuchadnezzar, but we'll get to that later on. Okay, so here we have, so he calls, yes?
When he says Belshazzar, or whatever his name is, according to the name of my God, is he actually saying that the name Belshazzar is actually a translation of Daniel?
No, I think he's recognizing that I think what's going on is we're having a recognition that Daniel's called Belshazzar, and we're reminded of why Daniel has this other name, because he's in Nebuchadnezzar's court. So we get to name that reflects Nebuchadnezzar's God, right? And that's what's going on. That's why Daniel has a different name, right? Because we know he's Daniel, but Nebuchadnezzar calls him Belshazzar, right?
Okay, but I'm saying maybe it's more specific than that. That he's saying that the name Belshazzar actually means the same thing as Daniel, that the Bel is the L part. And
in other words, the Daniel, well, I mean, not if you say that it's to keep, I mean, because Daniel, I mean, that would be to judge more, right? It wouldn't be to keep. I don't know how Daniel could be translated as to keep, or to guard rather, right? So if assuming that that etymology I just talked to you about is correct, it doesn't work. Like you could say, well, because on the contrary, if you say, I called before me Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, right? So honestly, this is for us, the readers, right? Or for us, the audience, right? We know he's Daniel. It's reminding us of Belshazzar. For Nebuchadnezzar, he's Belshazzar. And again, one assumes that there are accounts that are floating around by the name Daniel, by the name Belshazzar, and we have to know, guys, it's the same guy. It's the same person, right? So, and why does he have this other name? And it's because it's according to Nebuchadnezzar's God. He's got to have a name that reflects Nebuchadnezzar's God, and that's what this name is. Okay?
Yeah. Miriam?
Yes.
How much, both versions of Daniel are from the Masoretic text. There, I mean, like the Greek, both, how much time separates the two Greek versions of Daniel?
Oh, wow, you're asking. Okay, so it looks like that's a big question. I think in general, the Old Greek is considered to be the original, and the Theodotion at least in this case, in this case, the Old Greek is considered to be the older original one that we're always comparing Daniel to, as opposed to the Theodotion, which is later and closer to the Masoretic text, right? Because it's reflecting the Masoretic. Like it's again, I don't remember if in every single case it's like that, but in general, what we do in this case is we're comparing it with the Old Greek. Yes, but go ahead.
Wait. So the Septuagint is the translation of the Masoretic text into Greek or into?
Oh, no, it's not.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, we're going to get into this whole thing. Okay. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. I like your question. It's not, I enjoy your question. It's just we're 25 minutes in and like 3 verses in. So I'm going to address this, okay? Because it's an important question. All right. So when we talk about, because this is very important, because it's going to be important as we move along in Daniel and in this chapter, to know what are we talking about when we talk about the Septuagint or the Old Greek or the Theodotion. In general, these reflect a different Vorlage. These reflect a different base text. In other words, usually, not always, like we saw last week, that there can be changes in the Greek where different pieces of Greek are kind of brought in, or different pieces that are translated into Greek are brought in, and then we think that it happens in the Greek, probably. But for the most part, when we look at differences, we're usually thinking, or we usually tend to at least consider as a possibility that these differences existed in the Hebrew or Aramaic base text. That's true throughout the Septuagint, okay? So when we see something, for example, when I'll give a classic big difference, right? So the classic thing, that in the Masoretic text, when Cain says that and it was when Cain said to Havel something, right? Cain said to Havel, and it was when they were in the field that Cain kills Havel, right? So you're like, what did he say? We're missing a piece of it. It's very clearly missing. It's just gone, right? We just don't have what he said. It really looks like someone just sucked it out, okay? In the Septuagint, it says, and Cain said to Havel, Cain said to Abel, let's go to the field. Well, it's clear what happened. The piece was lost. You knew they were in the field afterwards. So what's he going to say? He says, let's go to the field. Now you have what he said. and you know how they got to the field, okay? So someone decided to fix it. That was fixed. That in general, these fixes are assumed to be, and sometimes we have evidence from like Qumran that they were already in the base text. They're already in the Hebrew. And then when they were translated, right, it essentially, let's talk about what we call the Old Greek, and especially when it comes to the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, right? When it comes to the Torah, right, it's clear that there was a decision to make because you had different versions floating around in the Second Temple period, and you have to decide which one are you going to translate into Greek, okay? So there was a tendency for whoever was translating Septuagintal books, it seems like, and there's an argument, right? How much it is true throughout the Bible. Gene Ulrich would say, no, you have to look at each book separately, but there's a tendency to take the more harmonistic version, the version with fewer problems, the version that has more solutions like that, and translate that. Someone's making noise in the background, so please everyone mute yourselves unless you have a question. So that's the the basis of these differences. Now, when we're talking about Second Temple works, like with Daniel, so it gets a little bit more complicated because at this point we're so late that they are writing things in Greek, like they're writing new stuff in Greek. So you could say, hey, all these editions are being written in Greek and added into Greek, right? Which would probably not be so for the things that were translated much earlier, like Shemot, Exodus, like, things like that, or like Bereshit, Genesis, right? It's like all those things that were translated much earlier would not have things kind of being added in the Greek. Here, probably. Here, we do have to ask that question. In terms of the editions that we have in the Old Greek, again, Michael Siegel, he makes an argument that there is a forlaga in Aramaic. He uses it by comparing verses and language in different verses and where it's coming from and how things are translated. I'm not going to go into it because I wasn't planning on going into it because we have half an hour. But he argues that the editions in the Old Greek, actually, many of them actually do have a basis in Aramaic, that it was a translation from an Aramaic work. And there you go. So usually when we talk about the Septuagint, we say Septuagint, we say the Old Greek. What we have in the back of our minds frequently is that these are based on some kind of actual version, what we call, let's say, the Proto-Septuagint, right? Which is whatever the Septuagint is based on, but wasn't in Greek yet, right? So, yeah. But honestly, with Daniel, we do ask the question because we're not 100% sure because this is late enough for them to be kind of adding things right in the Greek.
So it is assumed that the Proto-Septuagint was in Aramaic.
Well, in Hebrew, yeah. I mean, look, you can't really, like, I'm being a little bit unfair because there's no one Proto-Septuagint. Each book was translated, right? So each book is translated. That's what we have in this case. We're looking at the Old Greek and the Theodotion and which is original and which is this, and was there an Aramaic forlag? Was there, like that? Now, obviously, it was originally translated for something in Aramaic. The question is, are these differences, were these differences in the Aramaic version it's translated from, or were they added already in the Greek? Normally, the answer to that is almost automatically they were in the original was translated from, because if you're talking about an earlier work, they're generally not going to be messing with it in the translation stage. But something that's this late, where they're really writing original stuff in Greek at this point, you could say, well, maybe when they're doing the Greek edition, they are adding actually original, new things, right? Like we were talking about the prayer in chapter 3, that's being added in the Greek edition. Were they adding it at that point when they were translating it? Was it already added, in a different, so this is the sort of thing that we need to ask with Daniel. Okay. All right, back to our text. Okay. We're gonna do this. All right, here we go. Okay. So he's calling and he says it was v'diruach elahin kadishin bay, right? He has the spirit of the holy, and this is the question, and this is translate. I like that it translates here the holy gods, because what is he saying? He's saying he has the name of my God, and he has in him the spirit of the holy what? The holy gods, the holy angels. What does he mean when he says ruach elahin? What are we supposed to think that he means? Question, right? So I told him the dream, right? We don't know what the dream is yet. All right, and here we have, we're still not going to know because he has to address Daniel. Belshazzar Rav Chartumaya, right? Belshazzar, head of the magicians, our greatest of the magicians. Di anayit et di ruach elahin kadishin bach chorazla aneslach chezvei chelmi v'dichazet ufishrei emar, right? I know that you have the spirit of the holy gods, angels, whatever, and there's no secret that is kept from you. So tell me the visions of my dream and its meaning. But he's going to tell him. He's not going to wait for him. Okay, so now he's saying the dream. Okay, this is my dream. What was my dream? Okay, so there's this very tall tree. Right? It was very, it's very tall. It reached heaven, and you could see from it to the ends of the earth. So it had really nice leaves. It had a lot of fruit. It provided food for everything. It had, the animals were essentially taking shelter in its shade. Its birds were living in its trees and in its branches rather, and it was nourishing all creatures essentially. Who is this going? Well, who is this going to be? Well, we'll talk about it in just a second. Well, actually, when we get to the interpretation, right? So he's still saying his dream, and then what happened? What's the next part of the dream? Right? An angel and a holy one, meaning it's the same thing, an angel who is a holy one, right, landed from the heaven. If you look at this translation, it says a watcher and a holy one. Why a watcher? Because this is the earliest use that we see of ear to mean angel. Remember, Irin Kadishin, holy angels. We have it in our Zmirot, in the songs we sing on Shabbat. So we're used to that language. We have it also in Enoch, Irin. It's in translation already. They're translated as watchers, right? In all sorts of languages. So why are they translated as watchers? Because Irin, they're awake all the time, right? They're always awake, like angels. Angels don't sleep, right? So this is a word that's being used for angel. Later on, watchers becomes the specific angels who mated with human women in Genesis 6. However, or at least in terms of the understanding, certainly of the Second Temple period. However, even in the Second Temple period, this is a word for angel, right? So when we see it in different places, it can be those watchers, or it could be any angel. In this case, of course, it's any angel. It's an angel, right? So it comes down from the heavens. Godu ilana v'katzitzu anfohi ataru afye uvadaru inbe tnud chivta min tachtohi v'tziprayim min anfohi. Right? So he called out strongly and he said, cut down the tree, cut off its branches, shake its leaves, and scatter its fruit, and shush away, like drive away all the animals from beneath it and the birds from its branches. Baram ikashor shohi bar ashbuku uvesor di farsel nachash excuse me bidita divara uvetal shmaya yistaba mimchefta chalake basvara. So, but leave the stump, leave the roots, really, leave the roots, leave it in the ground, and bind it up in iron and brass in the grass, right? And let it be, it'll be wet with the dew. It'll just leave it for the animals, and they'll just abandon it. Okay. Now we have a weird kind of addition because it's going right into the interpretation. It's not staying in the dream. Livivei min anasha yishanon ulevav cheva yityahevlei v'shiv'a idanin yachlefun alohi. So let his heart be changed from a man. In other words, let his mind shift, right? And a beast heart be given him. Have him have like a beast mind. Right? And 7 periods will pass over him. Okay. And this is this is what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is he cuts down the tree, he binds the roots in iron and brass. Very weird, right? And drive all the animals and birds, and abandon him, and let his mind be shifted to be like an animal. All right. Yeah, I'm going to kind of run through this and the meaning. Okay, so this is what I dreamed, I, the king Nebuchadnezzar. And you, Belshazzar, now you tell me the meaning. Because of course, all the wise men of my kingdom, they couldn't tell me, right? But you can, because the spirit of the holy God or angels is in you. Then Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, like he doesn't know what to do for a bit, right? He's kind of scared, right? Why? Because you never want to be that kind of messenger, right? You never want to be the guy who's like, yeah, you know what this dream means? It means you're really screwed. Like, you don't want to be that guy who says that to the king, right? But what are you going to do? This is his job. So he says to Belshazzar, he says, don't be scared of the dream and its meaning. Right? And he says, my Lord, the dream it's essentially good for your enemies. The dream is for your enemies, and its meaning is for your adversaries. This is something that your enemies are going to love. Okay? Ilana di chazaita di reva utkif v'rumei yimteli shmaya because that tree that you saw, which is big and strong, and whose height reaches the heavens, and you can see the whole land. And it's and then whose leaves were great, and who gives food to everyone, and all the animals live under it, and the birds live in the branches. Antu malka di revatu tekaf urevutach revatu umetalishmaya v'shol tanach l'sof ara. Right? This is you. This is the king. Right? For you're great. You're strong. You've grown great. You've grown strong. You've reached your strength has reached the heaven, and your rule has reached the ends of the earth. Okay, so you're the tree. Now, note that what we're supposed to understand is not only are you the tree. By the way, in the Old Greek, the tree thing is kind of really expanded upon. But the point is, not only are you the tree, by the fact that you have all this power, you protect and nourish a lot of people. That's the whole beasts and birds thing, right? It's not just Nebuchadnezzar that we're talking about now. We're talking about all the people that he's protecting and helping in the economy and everything, okay? All right. So it's you. Godu ilana v'chabluhi baram ikar shoshoy ba'arashvuku b'sort of, he says, and that angel that you saw that said all these things, cut it down and put and bind its roots in the grass and let dew fall and v'im chevat barachalake, and let his portion be with the animals. Note, it doesn't say anything here about going crazy. The previous, in the dream, it said a thing, let his mind is going to change to be like an animal's mind. Here it doesn't say that, right? What it says is he's going to be with the animals until 7 periods pass over him. Okay. In other words, he's going, and here it's going to explain it. Right. This is what's saying what's going to happen to you. You're going to be driven out from among men. You're going to be living with the animals. You have to eat grass like oxen. Right? You're going to be wet with the dew being wet. You'll be outside in the rain, right? And 7 periods are going to pass over you. And until you understand that Ila'ah, the Most High, Elyon, right? The Most High God is actually the one who rules over men, right? And he's the one who decides who he gives it to. So until you get to that realization, you're going to be with the beasts of the field. What that means is the fact that the roots of the tree are left for you. That means that your kingdom will remain waiting for you until you come to this recognition. Okay, you'll still have the roots. Okay, until you come to this recognition. Lahen malka milki shparalach v'chata'ach b'tzidkach fruk v'avayatach b'michan anayin hen teve archa lishlev tach. Right. So let this sound good to you, right? And break off your sins by doing tzedakah, by doing righteousness. All right. And by doing mercy for the poor or the needy. And that way your peace, your prosperity will be longer. Okay. In other words, maybe you could put this off or delay it, or maybe prevent it by being good. Okay. But we're going to find out, but all this is going to happen to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to jump into this. Let me see if anyone's had questions. Okay, this is it. If anyone has questions, so before I jump into this, because I know we just ran through it, now we're going to go back and I want to point out certain things to you. Okay, any questions? Okay, so what it looks like actually is going on here, and this, I'm just gonna say, like I said, Michael Siegel does a really good, he does a really good analysis of this chapter. What seems to be going on is, why does he have madness in the middle of the dream when at the end it looks like he's just going to be exiled. He's going to be exiled and he's going to be with the beasts, right? And in fact, if we look a little bit ahead, right, when this actually happens to Nebuchadnezzar, he is driven away, right? and he becomes like a beast just because he can't groom himself. Everything grows, right? So he may look like a beast, but it doesn't seem like he goes crazy, except that it says, Umandi'i alai yituv, my understanding returned to me. But his understanding returning to him seems to be that he recognized God, right? And I blessed God. That's my understanding returning to me. So what it seems to be is there was a desire to kind of explain what was going on at some stage in the transmission of the story. And the scribe is like, okay, he went crazy, but where is that in the dream, right? It doesn't say in the dream he went crazy. I'll put it into the dream. I'll put it into the dream that he goes crazy. When he put it into the dream, he didn't put it into the interpretation. So he screwed up a little bit, right? Now the going crazy isn't in the Old Greek, okay? So that's one of the things that we could say, okay, it's not in the Old Greek. Is it because they took it out or because it wasn't in? But this seems to, this we seem to be able to track it from it not being in the interpretation. It's only in the dream. So he said, oh, his reason returned, that means he went crazy, whereas in the dream, I'll put it in the dream, and then it's just in the dream and not in the interpretation. So what it seems to be is, originally, what's the idea? That he was exiled and he must be with the beasts, okay? Why is this important? What do we care? Well, first of all, you do want to understand the chapter, right? What is the actual punishment? And it seems to be exile. But also it actually works more closely with the story of Nabonidus. Who's Nabonidus? Why do we care? Let's take a look at the prayer of Nabonidus. This was found in at Qumran. It's 4Q242. All right. Remember when we look at Qumran, so Q is for Qumran, 4 is the cave, and 242 is just the name of the fragment. It's just the number of the fragment. Okay. If you want to take a look, oh, did I close it? Oh, darn. I actually had the Dead Sea Scroll, the actual fragment open, but it looks like I closed it now. Oh, that's a shame. That really is a shame. Oh, well. Just give me a moment. Let me see if I have it open somewhere else. Just a sec. Not here. No, looks like not. Sorry, guys. I was going to show you a picture of the verse, but it would take too long now to find it. Okay, so I was going to show you a picture of the fragment. It's a really ugly script, by the way. It's not one of them that, the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have some that are just beautiful. The Isaiah scroll, you could just read it, like, right? And there are a lot of them like that. This isn't one of them. This is one you're like, buddy, who taught you to write? But it's still, they managed. And sorry, I don't mean to dump on scribes at Qumran. I'm sure that if I were at that time, I wouldn't be writing well either. Okay. So in this prayer, we see certain parallels to the story about Nebuchadnezzar, right? So we have Malet Celta di Tzale Nivni Melech. So it's Nivni, this guy Nivni, they think it's Nabonidus, right? So it's words of the prayer that Nivni the king prayed. All right, and here it seems like the bet is missing from Bavel, right? King Bavel Malka, the king of Bavel, the king of Babylon. B'shichna b'isha, he had a bad shin, he had a bad disease, right? Whatever this shin is meant to convey, he had a very bad disease. B'pitgam as a decree, right? And there they reconstructed God. Bit Teman, in Tema, okay? Where is Tema? This is actually interesting because Nabonidus, in fact, spent 10 years hanging around Tema instead of hanging around Babylon, right? Here's Babylon, if everyone can see. Can people see my screen? Am I showing my screen? Guys, can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So here's Babylon, okay? Nabonidus was a king who he was a little bit involved in religious reform. He was the last king of Babylon. He was the one who lost it all to the Persians. Okay, so he ruled He ruled 556 to 539, and he was away in Tema down here from 553 to 543, right? He just kind of hung out in Tema. He first went to fight the Arabians, right? He fought the Arabians, he conquered Edom, he did some stuff, but then he didn't come back. He just kind of hung around in Tema. People aren't quite sure why. He said the god Sin wanted him to stay away for 10 years, but it's not super clear. He was away for 10 years in Tema, right? And while he was away, they had a lot of trouble with worship in Babylon. And then finally he came back afterwards. They all blamed him. He wasn't doing the worship correctly, and that's why they lost to the Persians. Okay, so that's Nabonidus, and in fact, we have this this prayer. I'm just gonna, since I can see people's patience is at an end, let's just run through this prayer in English. Words of the prayer said by Nabonidus, king of Babylonia, the great king, when afflicted with an ulcer, that's the shchin, right? On command of the Most High God in Tema. I, Nabonidus, was afflicted, one assumes with shchin, for 7 years. And far from men I was driven. Now, some of this is reconstructed, right? Right, but it does seem that he was taken away from something. All right, and until and an exorcist pardoned my sins. Exorcist. I don't know why they're getting an exorcist. This is this is taken from the Livius translation here, but it says I would not say an exorcist. It was my I had to do something about my sins, right? And a Jew, right? A Jew essentially told me, right? He revealed and he told me what to do, right? Not to do, to give honor, right? Essentially, one assumes to give honor to the name of God, right? Exalt the name of the Most High God. When I was afflicted for 7 years with an evil ulcer to my stay at Tema, and he repeats it, right? I prayed to the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood, stone, and lime, right? Because I thought and considered them gods, right? Here, mitpalel, hayev Elohei kesef v'zahav etz even b'cheres, right? So he's like, originally I prayed to all these idols, and one assumes that this end of the story that we missed, he's like, and now I realize that the God of Israel is the correct God, or however it says, the Most High God is the correct God. So what are the parallels here? We have this again. We have this from Qumran. It's interesting to see the parallels. He is driven away he has a disease for 7 years in Tema. And what you can see is maybe this is an explanation long after the fact, long after Nabonidus is dead and gone, but we know that Nabonidus was just away in Tema for no reason. What was that reason? That reason was that he was diseased. He was diseased for 7 years, and that must be why he was away. But he was cured by a Jew who told him, listen, what you've got to do is you got to dump your sins and you've got to worship God, right? And so what are our parallels here? Here we have Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to be in exile for 7 years. What he needs to do to try and delay this judgment is that he's supposed to do good. And what the punishment is supposed to bring him to is a recognition of God. So there's a theory that at least a version of the story kind of influences this story about Nebuchadnezzar, and that really originally it was about Nabonidus. Okay, maybe not, but it's a nice idea, and it works even better when we talk about, like, somebody say, "Oh, did people think Nabonidus was mad because he was a religious reformer, et cetera, et cetera?" I don't think you have to say that. People don't think that was commonly accepted anymore. People don't really think that people thought Nabonidus was, but I think it would be enough to say he was in exile. He was in exile. Why is he not in Babylon? Why isn't he in Tema, far, far, far away, right, at the edges of the kingdom? And the answer is, well, because he's exiled. So, so here, and some other things about the tree. Robin has the picture of a tree with a band around it. And in fact, in Mesopotamia, we do have some evidence of them putting rings metal rings around the base of trees. However, we have in this story is putting metal ring around the roots of a tree. Why would you have a story where you have metal rings around the roots of a tree? So if we look at, let's look at the biblical parallels for this whole thing of a tree that's cut down, okay? So if we look at, I actually don't think this, oh, right here. If we look at Yechezkel, Lamed Aleph, Ezekiel 31, we have this story of talking about Ashur, Assyria, as a cedar, right? With wonderful branches. It's tall. It's next to the water, and we have a similar thing where all the birds are nesting in it. All the animals are coming to be in its shade, right? But what's going to happen? It's just going to be its end. In the end, God is going to cut it down, right? Because I'm going to deliver you into the hand of essentially your enemies, right? So it may be that you have a big, beautiful tree, but it doesn't matter. You're going to be handed into the hands of your enemies. In Yechezkel Yud Zayin, Ezekiel 17, we have a similar analogy used for Israel, right? That Israel is going to be this great, beautiful, wonderful tree, right? And in the end, it's all in God's hands, what trees are brought high and what trees are brought low. And in fact, if we look at, I think it's the end here, right? Yes. And we have a similar sort of situation. And this is where, and again, I know I'm quoting Michael Siegel a lot, but he deserves to be quoted a lot in this class. Here, this is an explanation. This is something that will explain where we get the rings of metal, right? So here we already know where Daniel has kind of drawing of this analogy of the tree where birds are in its branches and animals are resting under it. It's the same analogy we use for Assyria, a great nation, quote unquote, even though we don't like it much. A great nation is sheltering many people, is providing for many people, and it being cut down means they will no longer have nourishment. Here we have he's going to hew down the high trees, and he'll cut down the thickets, right, of the forest. He'll cut down the bushes kind of the forest with iron. And the cedar of Lebanon will fall either through a mighty one, or there's actually a way of understanding this as meaning bronze. So what's nikaf here? Nikaf means to cut down, but a more common meaning for nikaf is to encircle. That's the common meaning of that root. So Michael Siegel says this is what, in terms of composing this chapter of Daniel, that's the understanding. What is it saying? Not that I'm going to cut them down, but that I'm going to encircle them in iron. That's what I'm going to do, right? So that they can't, maybe this idea that they can't grow, as opposed to, if we look at the next chapter, and from the from the root of Yishai, in other words, the family of David, right? You're going to have a shoot coming out. In other words, that root will grow again, will bloom again, right? So that's the contrast from the way this kind of version in Daniel is reading it. In other words, not that I cut down the bushes, that I ring them in iron, right? And that's where that imagery comes from, because it's very strange imagery. So in fact, let's see what happens. In fact, what we have is, okay, so everything comes to pass with Nebuchadnezzar. So after 12 months, after a year, right, he's kind of walking around in the palace of his kingdom in Babylon. He's like, look how great Babylon is, right? That I built for myself for a palace, by the might of my power and for the glory of my honor. Od milta before malka kal mishmayan nefal. So just the words came out of his mouth. Here he is. He's at the peak of his pride. He's learned nothing. He's at the peak of his pride. This is where he's going to fall. As the words come out of his mouth, he hears a voice from heaven, a sound from heaven. Kal mishmayan nefal lach amrin Nebuchadnezzar malka machuta adat mina. Right? We're to you we say, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, your kingdom is being taken from you. Umin anashalach tardin bimchevat bara medorach aispa ketorin lach yitamun b'shiv'a idanin yachlafun alach and alach. Excuse me, and you are going to be driven out from mankind. You're going to be driven out from people. You're going to be living with the animals of the field. You're going to with the wild animals rather. You're going to eat grass like oxen. You're going for 7 periods, 7 years, right? Those 7 years will pass you. That until you learn that the Most High God, or the Most High, is the one who actually rules over the kingdom of man, and he will give it to who he wants. All right. בשעתם מאותה שפת על נבוכדנצר ומנהלה שטריד ויספק כתורך ליחל ומיטל ישמעיה כתשמי יצטבע עד יסערי כניש ורבע ותפרוי כתפרין. Okay, so what happens? So yes, in fact, he's driven out from men. He eats grass. He's out in the rain until his hair grows like eagle feathers, like eagles, right? And his nails grow like bird's claws. In other words, he's out there, he's not grooming himself. So his hair grows, his nails grow. So again, it doesn't really say that he went crazy. It says that he was like an animal. He was an animal grooming wise because he's been driven from mankind. Like Satyamaya Anna Nebuchadnezzar Ainai Lishmaya Nitzlet Umadia La Yetuv Ulila Abarchet Ulchai Alma Shabchet Bahadret Dishaltane Shaltan Alam Umachute Im Dar Vadar. And at the end of these days, of the end of that period, essentially, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High. Right, and I praised and thanked and praised and gave glory to the everlasting one, whose rule is an everlasting rule, and whose kingdom is from generation to generation. V'chol dairei ara k'lach hashivin u'chmitzpeyei aved b'chel shemaya v'dairei ara v'la itai d'imachei v'dei v'yamar le ma'avadet. And all the people of the earth are thought as nothing, and God does what he wants. There's no actual subject here, right? He does what he wants, but God does what he wants with the host of heaven, and with the inhabitants of earth, and no one can stop him, and no one can say, what are you doing? Bezimna mandii yituvalai v'likar machuti hadri v'zivi yituvalai v'li hadovrai v'ravravana yivaun v'al machuti adkanat u'ravu yatiru husfatli. So as soon as my understanding returned to me, right, and I essentially got everything back, right. I'm not sure. Here it's saying, and for the glory of my kingdom. Could read it that if you say really, I don't think so. I think it just means the glory of my kingdom returned to me. In other words, everything came back, right? All my greatness, my splendor, all the and I essentially I got everything back. So now I, Nebuchadnezzar, I praise and exalt and give glory to the King of the heaven, that all his works are true and all his paths are just, and anyone who walks in pride, he can bring down. Okay, excited. So, and we actually can understand why in the Old Greek you have that addition of in the 18th year to bring this year when Nebuchadnezzar is brought down to be right after he destroys the temple. In other words, why does he get this punishment now? And the answer is because now is when he's done this thing that shows just how prideful he was, right? And the whole point of this story, the whole point of this story is to show us a king who must recognize that in order to maintain his kingdom, he must recognize that God is over him. What's interesting is that there is no, and Daniel in general, there is no real long-lasting punishment for Nebuchadnezzar, right, for destroying the temple. Now, actually, I would say this is actually a little bit of a against the argument that this is based on Nabonidus, because if you're going to have it on Nabonidus, wouldn't you, and you're writing so much later than Nabonidus, wouldn't you have something where he loses his kingdom? He's not just gone for 7 years. He loses everything. Why would you give everything back to him, right? And in fact, with Nebuchadnezzar, the only way I can explain why does Nebuchadnezzar get things back, for us when we don't read Daniel, what is most important to us about Nebuchadnezzar is that he destroys the temple, right? I mean, that's really like, if you say, what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He destroyed the temple, right? What does he have coming to him? Destruction, right? I mean, that's what you would think, right? So it's weird to read a story where he gets punished for 7 years. And then he's specifically told it's being saved for him. He's going to get everything back as long as he recognizes God. Right? So that actually makes sense when someone knows that Nebuchadnezzar, in fact, did continue, right? He did keep his kingdom. So how can you reconcile that with what he did? Well, he had to have a punishment and recognize God, right? And the point of all these stories that we have in this part of Daniel is this constant repetition that the kings must recognize God. All these kingdoms, all these strong kingdoms, they are strong. They go on. You shouldn't expect they will pass eventually, yes. But meanwhile, the main thing to recognize is that God is over them. It's God who decides if they continue or if they fail. I see that there is a question here. So Susan asked if Nabonidus was the last Babylonian king later than Nebuchadnezzar. Was Nabonidus' story imported into the Daniel Nebuchadnezzar story by later editors who knew of Nabonidus' prayer? Okay, so this is the thing. What does Nabonidus' prayer that we looked at, what does that tell us? Let's say we say this is based on Nabonidus. What that would mean is the prayer is simply evidence of another version, a similar version of the story connected to Nabonidus. So we could say, well, this story is based on that story of Nabonidus, but no one remembers Nabonidus. Who cares about Nabonidus? No one talks about Nabonidus. People talk about Nebuchadnezzar, right? So it was transferred into Nebuchadnezzar, who's kind of the main king in most of these stories, right? Most of this section stories. So it became Nebuchadnezzar, right? Did they necessarily know about this document? I would say almost certainly not. We have one fragmented copy of this document. Does this document seem to reflect evidence of a general story that people are telling about Nabonidus with him being missing for 7 years? Yeah, sure, absolutely, right? And it's exactly the sort of thing that people would say orally even. You know, there was this king, and he had a horrible disease for 7 years, and then a Jewish wise man came to him and said, "You need to recognize God, and you need to come." Like that whole story works very well as a story you tell, and it's even better when people remember that Nabonidus was missing, right? When people are actually still like say, "Oh, you know Nabonidus," and who knows what other stories were told about Nabonidus just in the general culture, right? Because I mean, he's gone when he should have been in Babylon. What stories did people tell? Like that's how stories get started. So that's a possibility. Thank you for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next week. And I'll, is there anything? Yes, wait, I see a question.
We may just need to review this a little bit before we start on the next one. This is a lot of material.
Okay, so I'll do a recap in the next class. Okay?
Thank you.
So we'll do a recap. Yeah, I know we bounced around a lot. So, so I'll do a recap in the next class so that we can start fresh with our next story. And I look forward to seeing you all then.